This footage you're looking at shows what it looks like to fight, house by house, through your own streets, against fellow citizens who've sworn loyalty to ISIS. In May 2017, Philippine forces learned this firsthand during what began as a routine raid to capture a terrorist leader in Marawi city. What is shocking about this battle is that it wasn't just another counter-terrorism operation, but a 153-day urban nightmare that would become the longest and bloodiest battle in the Philippines since World War II. But what really happens when local militants, foreign jihadists, and government forces tear apart an entire city in the name of their competing visions of the future? You'll find out through the devastating story of the siege that turned a peaceful Islamic city into a war zone. The crisis began on May 23, 2017, with what should have been a simple arrest. Philippine military and police forces conducted a raid in the Basak Malutlut area of Marawi city, targeting Isnilon Hapilon, the ISIS leader in Southeast Asia, with a $5 million bounty on his head. Intelligence indicated he was meeting with local militants from the Maute group, brothers who had grown up in the city and pledged allegiance to the Islamic State. But when the security forces moved in at 2 p.m., they walked into something far bigger than expected. Hapilon's forces opened fire, calling for reinforcements from the Maute group. Within hours, what began as a targeted raid exploded into full-scale urban warfare as hundreds of armed Marawi residents rushed into the streets, waving ISIS black flags and attacking strategic points throughout the city. The militants weren't just visiting terrorists. Many were locals who had been radicalized and were now fighting for their vision of an Islamic caliphate in their own hometown. The speed of the militant takeover was staggering. Within the first day, they had occupied Marawi City Hall, the main hospital, Mindanao State University, and the city jail, releasing 107 inmates to join their ranks. They surrounded the military headquarters at Camp Ranao, set fire to St. Mary's Catholic Cathedral and Dansalan College, and began taking hostages. Among those captured was Father Chito Suganob, a Catholic priest, along with several parishioners from the Cathedral of Our Lady Help of Christians. The militants used Father Chito's cell phone to contact Bishop Edwin de la Pena, making demands for a military ceasefire. The bishop later recalled hearing crying in the background as the captors forced the priest to relay their ultimatums. President Rodrigo Duterte responded by declaring martial law across all of Mindanao, giving military commanders expanded powers to deal with what had become the biggest crisis of his administration. It was textbook terrorism, but it was also an attempt to establish ISIS territory in the heart of the Philippines. The militants' strategy was clear. They wanted to raise the jihadist flag over the Lanao del Sur provincial capital and declare a wilayat, an ISIS provincial territory. Videos recovered later showed Hapilon, the Maute brothers, and Malaysian militant commander Mahmud Ahmad planning the assault, confirming that foreign fighters had joined the local insurgents. The battle that followed would redefine Philippine military doctrine. In a city packed with over 200,000 civilians, the fighting wasn't out in the jungle. It was up close, street to street, in the heart of an urban environment turned war zone. And the militants had prepared extensively, digging tunnels between buildings, boring holes through walls, and creating an interconnected network of fighting positions. Major General Rolly Bautista, the ground commander, had fought insurgents for years, but never faced anything like this. The military found themselves fighting room by room through a city where every building could be a trap, every mosque a potential sniper's nest, and every tunnel an escape route for the enemy. The fighting was complicated by religious sensitivities. Striking mosques required careful consideration, while the militants used these sacred spaces as weapons storage and fighting positions. Young officer Billy Kojam, fresh from military school, led multiple assaults on a green building that served as an enemy stronghold. It took 4 attempts over 3 days to capture it, with 1 soldier killed in the process. The militants employed increasingly sophisticated tactics as the battle progressed. They used improvised explosive devices triggered by cell phones, forced child soldiers as young as 10 to carry M16 rifles, and employed methamphetamine to help fighters endure prolonged combat. Philippine forces found bags of shabu and drug paraphernalia in captured positions, with militants appearing high during firefights. One of the war's most harrowing episodes occurred at Baloy Bridge on the first night of fighting. First Lieutenant Geraldo Alvarez took 19 men in armored vehicles to rescue a wounded officer and bring reinforcements, but they drove straight into a coordinated ambush. RPGs disabled their vehicles, leaving the rescue team stranded in enemy territory. For 5 days, Alvarez and his men held out in houses near the bridge as militants burned buildings around them and snipers picked off anyone who moved. They ran out of ammunition and had to scavenge from their destroyed vehicles. Helicopter rescue attempts failed when enemy fire forced pilots to abort. When rescue finally came on the 5th day, Alvarez brought home 15 of his 19 men, a remarkable achievement that earned him a nomination for the Medal of Valor. But the cost was clear. Baloy Bridge would remain in enemy hands for 2 months, becoming the site of the war's bloodiest day when 13 Marines died there on June 9th. The battle revealed the truly international nature of the ISIS threat in Southeast Asia. Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzana confirmed that militants from Malaysia, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and Chechnya had joined the fighting. Intelligence sources counted fighters from multiple nationalities who had traveled to Marawi specifically to help establish the caliphate. This foreign involvement complicated the conflict significantly. Unlike traditional Philippine insurgencies, this wasn't about local grievances or political autonomy. It was part of ISIS's global expansion strategy. The militants fought with a fanaticism that surprised even veteran commanders, preferring death to surrender and using suicide tactics rarely seen in previous Philippine conflicts. Australia provided surveillance aircraft to help locate enemy positions, while China sent rifles to support government forces. The United States deployed special forces in an advisory role, marking increased international concern about ISIS expansion in Southeast Asia. The siege created a massive humanitarian crisis. Over 90% of Marawi's population, more than 180,000 people, fled the city in the early days of fighting. Those who remained faced a nightmare existence, trapped between government airstrikes and militant brutality. The militants showed no mercy to civilians who couldn't prove their Islamic faith. They stopped evacuation convoys and massacred those who couldn't recite verses from the Quran. At least 19 civilians were killed in the first hours of fighting, with the death toll climbing throughout the siege. Stories of civilian heroism emerged alongside the tragedy. Muslim residents protected their Christian neighbors, with some declaring they would die before allowing militants to harm their friends. The siege demonstrated that the vast majority of Marawi's Muslim population rejected the extremist ideology, even as their city burned around them. Abdul Mohaming and other residents initially thought the gunfire was just another clan war, common in the region, before realizing the scale of what was happening. Neighbors became heroes in the rush to rescue trapped civilians, organizing convoys and risking their lives to help people escape. What the military initially expected to resolve in days stretched into months. The militants proved adept at urban warfare, using the city's layout to their advantage. They controlled key bridges, forcing government forces into costly frontal assaults while maintaining supply lines through tunnels and Lake Lanao. The Philippine Air Force conducted extensive bombing campaigns, but the urban environment limited their effectiveness. Airstrikes risked civilian casualties and friendly fire incidents. At least 12 government soldiers died from accidental bombings during the conflict. The military had to balance the need for firepower with the goal of preserving what remained of the city. International attention focused on the use of air power against the militants' urban strongholds. Videos showed extensive destruction as entire neighborhoods were leveled, leading to criticism about proportionality and civilian protection. The government defended the tactics as necessary to dislodge well-entrenched fighters. By October 2017, the militants had been compressed into a small area near Lake Lanao. Intelligence indicated that only about 30 fighters remained, including the key leaders Hapilon and Omar Maute. But they still held hostages, including Father Chito, who had been captive for nearly 5 months. The final assault came on October 16th in an operation led by Colonel Almodovar. A bullet to Hapilon's chest and another to Omar Maute's head ended their reign of terror. The next day, President Duterte declared Marawi liberated, though fighting continued for several more days as the last militants made their final stand. Father Chito was found abandoned by his captors near a mosque, flown immediately to meet President Duterte after 117 days in captivity. His rescue marked the symbolic end of the siege, though the physical and psychological scars would last much longer. The statistics tell a story of unprecedented destruction in Philippine military history. The 5-month battle killed 978 militants, 168 government forces, and 87 civilians. Over 1,400 government soldiers were wounded, while 12 militants were captured alive. The material damage was estimated in the billions, with much of Marawi's historic center reduced to rubble. The human cost extended beyond the battlefield statistics. The Philippine Army's highest-ranking combat casualty was Captain Rommel Sandoval, a Scout Ranger Company commander who was posthumously awarded the Medal of Valor. Among the civilian casualties, at least 40 died from illness in evacuation centers, highlighting the broader humanitarian impact of the displacement. The battle had lasted 153 days, longer than some of the most famous sieges in military history. The armed forces, Chief General Eduardo Año, confirmed that this represented the heaviest urban fighting in the Philippines since World War II, requiring the combined efforts of Army, Air Force, and Navy forces in an unprecedented joint operation. Recovery efforts faced enormous challenges that extended far beyond military victory. Bodies remained buried in rubble months after the fighting ended, with human skeletons still visible among the debris when recovery teams finally gained access. The sight was heartbreaking. Entire neighborhoods reduced to concrete dust and twisted metal, with the remains of civilians and combatants alike scattered throughout the destruction. Unexploded ordnance made much of the city too dangerous for civilians to return. The military estimated that at least 10 armored vehicles had been lost during the fighting, while the economic impact of the destroyed commercial district would take years to calculate. The government promised reconstruction aid estimated at 500 million pesos that militants had looted from the city, but the scale of destruction would require far more resources and time to address. The cultural loss was immeasurable. Marawi had been known as the City of Mosques, with numerous Islamic architectural treasures that had defined the city's identity for generations. Many of these historic structures lay in ruins, representing not just physical destruction, but the loss of cultural heritage that had taken centuries to build. The Battle of Marawi marked a turning point in the Philippine counter-terrorism strategy. The military had to rapidly adapt from jungle warfare to urban combat, developing new tactics for fighting in built-up areas. The experience influenced doctrine, training, and equipment procurement for years afterward. The siege also highlighted the threat of ISIS expansion beyond the Middle East. The ability of foreign fighters to link up with local groups and seize territory demonstrated the global nature of the terrorist threat. For Southeast Asian governments, Marawi served as a wake-up call about the need for regional cooperation against extremism. For the people of Marawi, the battle represented both tragedy and resilience. Their city had been devastated, but the overwhelming rejection of extremist ideology by the local population provided hope for eventual recovery. The sight of Muslims protecting Christians during the siege became a powerful symbol of the religious tolerance that the militants had tried to destroy. The Marawi siege stands as one of the most significant urban battles of the 21st century. A 153-day reminder that the fight against extremism requires not just military force, but the preservation of the values and communities that terrorists seek to destroy. For the soldiers who fought there and the civilians who endured it, Marawi remains a testament to both the cost of radicalism and the resilience of those who refuse to surrender to it. If you'd like to see more about an urban fight just like this, but in Russian territory, then I'd recommend you take a look at the next video about what it was like to fight in Grozny. Thank you for watching.